Hello everyone. Good afternoon everyone. I warmly welcome everyone to this meet as we celebrate the World Suicide Prevention Day 2020. This day is celebrated so as to create an awareness and educate people about suicide. Also, it is celebrated in order to provide worldwide commitment and action to prevent suicides with various activities. This day has been observed worldwide since 2003. It is also a very special day because it is the very first program organized by the Department of Psychology at Tetso College. It is an honor to have everyone joining us from your own workspace. Without any further ado, let me kickstart our session. Let me read out what we have in store for all of us. So, my name is Indimna Nongkamer and I am the chairperson for today's session. We have opening remarks by Ms. Nozanino. She is an assistant professor, Department of Psychology at Tetso College. We have amazing topics to be covered by the first semester students, Department of Psychology. We have Hugo Semp with the topic Suicide and the Media. Mengodino Solo will be taking on suicide among young adults and Nimino Tati on the culture of suicidal prevention. Also, we have a little sort of of presentation of the activity done by the psychology department and reflections, which would be led by Ms. Bontanglo. She is an assistant professor, Department of Psychology at Tetso College, and Si Moinkong, BA first semester psychology. And at the end, Inibinla, first semester psychology, would do the closing remarks. As this is a virtual meet, all the participants can take their time simultaneously as to prevent any and at the end, in first semester psychology will do the closing remarks. And this is a virtual meet, all the participants can take their time simultaneously so as to be efficient. So now I give the time to Ms. Nozanino for the opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I welcome you all to the students' webinar organized by the Department of Psychology on the occasion of World Suicide Prevention Day, as mentioned by our chairperson, Imimenta. And as a department, this is our first program, so we are all delighted to have you all join us in this very first program. So to begin with, suicide, as we all know, is not a new word. We all have heard of it, or either know someone, or maybe a family of a victim, a suicidal victim, or say even someone who had such a suicidal thoughts. So, and if you look at the timeline of the organizing such a suicidal prevention, it was firstly initiated way back around in the year 1960s. But sadly, we can say that suicide awareness, especially in our context or our state, we can say that suicide awareness has been somewhat put in the back burner. And instead of much have been talked about violence, abuse. It can be both physical abuse or substance abuse. And but however, we don't really talk about suicide or suicide prevention or awareness, and actually that is the problem. So saying that staying silent about suicide is a problem because it creates a confusion. It also promotes stigma, and then it isolates people with people when they need help the most. So and at one, I presume that at one point or the other, we all might have gone through, or maybe we might go through some kind of rejection, a failure, setbacks, or maybe a despair, and all this can make all of us feel hopeless, or may make us feel hopelessness. So I would like to appeal all of you to to let us all create a compassionate conversation in creating a community which listens, eliminates the taboos, and show empathy, and also in creating such awareness of a mental health or maybe a suicide prevention. So on this note, I would like to appeal all those present here today, and those who are listening, to at least listen to the students' conversation, or the students whatever they are going to deliver, and ask ourselves in whichever way we can help someone who is in need, and at the same time enhance oneself with some key points from this program. All right, and so on that note, I would like to thank you all once again for your presence here, and I would give the rest of the time to the other presenters, and I hope you all will have a fruitful webinar session. Yeah, thank you all for joining.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucen. I'm from BA first semester. Firstly, I'd like to thank Ms. Wantanglo and Ms. Nozinino for giving me this opportunity to talk in front of you. So, without much further delay, I'll start off with my presentation. So, my presentation is based on the topic suicide and media. Okay, so media and suicide. As you all know that social media and suicide is a relatively new phenomenon, which concerns social media's influence on suicide-related behavior. Suicide is a leading cause of death worldwide. Approximately 1.54 million people will die from suicide in the year 2020, according to the World Health Organization. Suicide has been identified not only as an individual phenomenon, but as being influenced by social and environmental factors, and there is increasing evidence that the internet and social media can influence suicide-related behavior. As the internet becomes more ingrained in people's everyday life, the mental and emotional damage it can potentially cause to an individual increases. The impact of the media on suicidal behavior seems to be most likely when a method of suicide is specified, especially when presented in detail. When the story is reported or portrayed dramatically and prominently, for example, with photographs of the deceased or large headlines, and when suicides of celebrities are reported. Younger people seem to be most vulnerable to the influence of the media, although limited evidence also shows an impact on elderly people. Another factor is similarity between the media stimulus or model and the observer in terms of age, sex, and nationality. An important aspect of the presentation of suicide in the media is that it usually oversimplifies the causes, attributing the act to single factors such as financial disasters, broken relationships, or failure in examinations. The most common factor leading to suicide, mental illness, is often overlooked. Tackling this problem is one component of preventing suicides, and it is included in the recently published National Suicide Prevention strategy for England, also known as NSPSE. Relevant questions are therefore how this should be done and whether it can be effective. One approach has been to produce guidelines for the media, of which there are now several. All these emphasize the need to avoid dramatic reporting or portrayal of suicide and specifying means used. Most highlight the deliberity of providing accurate facts about causes, including due emphasis on mental health problems. At present, no clear policy exists for the problem of suicide sites on the internet. One potential drawback of guidelines is that in isolation, they may be seen as dictating what the media can or cannot do and as threatening freedom of speech. Firstly, for them to have credibility with authorities in the media and with journalists, they must be based on evidence. Secondly, they should be produced ideally as a collaboration between researchers, public health policymakers, and senior media personnel. Thirdly, which is perhaps most difficult, they should be shown to work. Some limited evidence exists of this. In an initiative in Switzerland, it was shown that collaboration between researchers and the media resulted in a reduction of sensational and lengthy reports of suicides in newspapers. No attempt was made, however, to measure the impact on suicide. Efforts to limit the reporting of subway suicides in Vienna through the collaboration of researchers and journalists were followed by a reduction in the number of suicides and suicide attempts by this method. A further but unanswered question is whether media portrayal of positive coping with adversity in circumstances that might have led to suicidal acts could provide a model that might also reduce suicidal behavior. Steps in this direction are worth exploring, but will also need collaborative initiatives. Their evaluation will present a considerable but surmountable challenge. In one of the more widely known cases, the death of Phoebe Prince, it is generally believed that her suicide was a direct consequence of relentless bullying and cyberbullying. Bullying, be it on social media or not, or physical or not, is a huge problem, significantly increasing victims' risks of suicidal behavior. So let me share a short talk on about the Phoebe Prince. The suicide of Phoebe Prince on January 14, 2010 led to the criminal prosecution of 6 teenagers for charges, including civil rights violation, as well as to the enactment of stricter anti-bullying legislation by the Massachusetts State Legislature. Prince had moved from Ireland to South Hadley in the US state of Massachusetts. Her suicide, after suffering months of bullying from school classmates, brought international attention to the problem of bullying in American schools. In March 2010, a state anti-bullying task force was set up as a result of her death. The Massachusetts legislation was signed into law on May 3, 2010. The accused stood trial in 2011. Sentences of probation and community services were handed down after guilty pleas on May 5, 2011. Another risk factor may be media accounts of suicide that romanticize or dramatize the description of suicidal deaths, possibly leading to an increased number of suicides. The media tends to popularize videos and social media posts to inform the country of the rising trouble, which may create a popular appeal to the young and immature minds of teenagers. Social media could provide higher risk with the promotion of different kinds of pro-suicidal sites, messages boards, chat rooms, and forums. Also, the internet not only reports suicide incidents but documents suicide methods. For example, suicide pact, an agreement between 2 or more people to commit suicide at a particular time and often by the same lethal means. The role the internet plays, particularly social media, in suicide-related behavior is a topic of growing interest. Okay, so the Press Council of India, chaired by Justice C.K. Prasad, in a release dated September 13, 2019, has adopted guidelines on reporting on suicide based on the World Health Organization guidelines. It states that newspaper and news agencies, while reporting the cases of media, must not place stories about suicide prominently and unduly repeat such stories. They must not explicitly describe the method used. They must not provide details about the site or location. They must not use sensational headlines. They must not use photographs, video footage, or social media links. Uh, Possibly the most influential approach to the problem of media and society will be through ensuring that training courses for careers in the media pay adequate attention to the important topic. Similarly, initiatives should be made available to those already established in media careers. Finally, inappropriate media portrayal and reporting of suicidal behavior should be immediately highlighted. This should encourage producers and editors to remain aware of their potentially influenced role in future suicides. So with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you for this time.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mengubin Yosolo, and this afternoon I will be speaking briefly on the topic suicide among young adults. Suicide is defined as a fatal, self-injurious act with some evidence of intent to die. Worldwide, more than 800,000 people die due to suicide every year. It is estimated that about 1.5 million people will die due to suicide by the year 2020. The suicide mortality rate in 2015 was 10.7 per 100,000, which means about one death every 20 seconds. Suicide is the second leading cause of death, following motor vehicle accidents among teenagers and young adults. On average, adolescents aged 15 to 19 years have an annual suicide rate of about 1 in 10,000 people. Among young adults from 12 to 16 years of age, up to 10% of boys and 20% of girls have considered suicide. Gay and lesbian adolescents are more likely to attempt suicide than their heterosexual peers. The definition of youth in terms of strict age ranges is rather arbitrary and varies by country and over time. Suicide under the age of 5 is hard to find. Most literature on youth suicide refers to school-aged children, 7 to 12 years, and adolescents, 13 to 20 years. These young people are by nature vulnerable to mental health problems, especially during the years of adolescence. This period in life is characterized by movement, changes, and transitions from one state into another in several domains at the same time. Young people have to make decisions about important concrete directions in life, for example, school, living situation, peer group, etc. They must also address new challenges with regard to building their own identity, developing self-esteem, acquiring increasing independence and responsibility, building new intimate relationships, and more. In the meantime, they are subject to ongoing changing psychological and physical processes themselves. And besides that, they are often confronted with high expectations, sometimes too high, from significant relatives and peers. Such situations inevitably provoke a certain degree of helplessness, insecurity, stress, and a sense of losing control. To address these challenges and successfully cope with these emotions, young people must have access to significant supporting resources such as a stable living situation, intimate friendships, a structural framework, and economic resources. Adolescence is an anxious and unsettling period as boys and girls face the difficulties of transition into adulthood. It is a period in life that is often confusing, leaving teens feeling isolated from family or peers. Unfortunately, some may, at one point or another, perceive suicide as a permanent answer to problems that are more often than not just temporary. The self-doubts, confusion, and pressures to succeed or conform can come at a high price for troubled adolescents. Girls generally attempt suicide more than boys, but boys are about 4 times more likely to die from the suicide attempt. This is because the methods that boys choose, often using firearms or hanging, are more lethal than those chosen by girls, namely drug overdoses or cutting themselves. Unfortunately, India has the highest suicide rate in the world among the youth, standing at 35.5 per 100,000 people for 2012, the last year for which numbers are available. These numbers aren't even half of the actual cases because a lot of suicide cases remain unregistered and unreported due to the stigma and taboo that still surrounds the very word suicide in our society. Even in our own home state, Nagaland, we have seen cases of young adults taking their own lives due to financial pressures, relationship problems, and a lot of unaddressed mental health issues. However, as mentioned earlier, because of the stigma and taboo regarding suicide in our society, a lot of these cases have gone unregistered and have been hidden instead. The reason for such high numbers of suicide in the Indian society among the young adults can be attributed to lack of economic, social, and emotional resources. More specifically, academic pressure, workplace stress, social pressures, modernization of urban centers, relationship concerns, and the breakdown of support systems. Some researchers have attributed the rise of youth suicide to urbanization and the breakdown of the traditional large family support system. The clash of values within families is an important factor for young people in their lives. As young Indians become more progressive, their traditionalist households become less supportive of their choices pertaining to financial independence, marriage age, premarital sex, rehabilitation, and taking care of the elderly. Each year, between 30 and 40 people per 100,000 Indians aged between 15 and 29 kill themselves. This accounts for about a third of all suicides in the country. India's suicides are a result of its traditionalist middle-income residents transitioning to an increasingly globalized landscape, experts say. Among the adolescents in India, a common cause for concern is the pressure from parents to do well in the national board examinations, especially for class 12, before finishing school. As scores in these exams often determine college admissions and subsequent employment opportunities, students aged 16 to 18 are often subjected to undue pressure at home to succeed. When they don't, suicide becomes a way out. In 2013 alone, 2,471 suicides were attributed to failure in examination. Moreover, the consequences of gender bias are among the leading causes of suicides among young women in India. The suicide rate among those with more education is higher than those with little or no education. In India, the people with a background of higher education form a minuscule 4.5% of the total population, a majority of whom are the youth and thus the highest risk-bearing group. In the present case scenario of the global pandemic, where everybody has been confined to the four walls of their homes, few cases have been reported around the world where people, out of fear of getting COVID-19 infection, social stigma, isolation, depression, anxiety, emotional imbalance, economic shutdown, lack and or improper knowledge, financial and future insecurities took their lives. With recent suicide reports, we can anticipate the rippling effect of this virus on worldwide suicide events. Studies have also shown that a lot of young adults who are currently confined in households with abusive parents or relatives, those who are witnessing and going through broken marriages of their parents, those who are caught up in toxic relationships themselves, and those who are currently suffering due to lack of basic necessities and struggling to make ends meet due to increased unemployment are at risk of suicidal tendencies apart from those with mental health problems. Though preventable, suicide is a serious health problem. Survivors of suicide attempts and their family often face stigma and discrimination in many forms. The impact of suicide on families, friends, and communities is devastating and far-reaching. In these challenging times, we must work towards providing comprehensive, integrated, and responsive mental health and social care services in community based settings, and the need for schools, colleges, and universities to provide mental health service and counseling is at its peak right now. The young adults of today's generation are the future of tomorrow's world. And if we do not give enough importance and attention to address the problems driving them to take their lives today, we may lose many potentially great leaders and civilians of tomorrow. In conclusion, I would like to request each and everyone attending this webinar to check in with the people around you, your friends, cousins, family, or neighbors about their well being, how they've been managing and spending their time, if there's anything you could do to help, or simply just if they want to share their problems with you, be it through a phone call or a text, because sometimes all people need is a listening ear to assure themselves that they matter and that somebody cares enough to reach out and help. And this is the very least we can do as individuals to make a difference and hopefully save a life. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My topic is culture of suicidal behavior. As we all know by now that suicidal behavior often results from experiencing humiliation and shame, lack of support from family members, failure to meet expectations, or from other environmental factors. Although there are many services available like the therapies, psychiatrists, or the support groups to those experiencing thoughts of suicide, the decision to seek help can be influenced by a person's cultural background. In some cultures, suicide is morally acceptable under particular circumstances. For instance, among the Buddhist monks, self-sacrifice for religious reasons can be viewed as an honorable act. The Japanese culture towards suicide are mixed, and even some glorify suicide when done for good reasons, such as controlling one's own destiny. In India, it was acceptable for a widow to burn herself on her husband's funeral pyre in order to remain connected to her husband rather than to become an outcast in society. The traditional belief is that with this act, a husband and a wife will be blessed in paradise and in their subsequent rebirth. According to the World Health Organization, the top suicide cases in the world are from the Asian countries. South Korea has a massive record of suicidal deaths happening every year. One factor in its high suicide rate is suicide amongst the elderly. Traditionally, children have been expected to care for their aging parents. However, because the system has largely disappeared in the 21st century, many elderly people commit suicide so they do not feel like they are a financial burden in their families. In addition to the elderly, students have higher than average suicide rates, at least in part because their families tend to put high levels of pressure on them to succeed academically. And when they do not achieve the goals that their parents have set for them, they feel that they have dishonored their families, and thereafter they are ashamed to face the society. And this very sense of shame can keep them from seeking help when they are in distress. In, in addition, researchers have found that financial problems were more likely to contribute to suicide in Asian cultures. On the other hand, Japanese men are twice as likely to commit suicide as their female counterparts, particularly after a divorce. Of special concern is suicide among men who have recently lost their jobs and are no longer able to provide for their families. People are expected to stay married with a person and stay on a single job for their entire life. And the pressure of this expectation can make a divorce or job loss feel like a complete failure. Furthermore, it is more acceptable for them to kill their own children along with oneself than to complete suicide alone, leaving the children in others' care. In India, suicide is more common in urban slums, lodging homes where poverty is on a high rate. Also, over the years, India has also seen numerous suicide cases done by students because of exams, especially the NEET exams. In China, a person tries to kill themselves every 2 minutes. It has been reported that most of the suicide cases are because of social isolation and family relationships. In many cases, liability has become a controversial issue, with some families insisting that universities should be held liable when students commit suicide. Some even seek compensation for the loss of a loved one. In interviews carried out by journalists on the subject of suicide, the majority of people seem to agree that educational establishments should bear a large part of the responsibility for campus suicides, saying that they have a duty to counsel students and help to maintain their mental and physical health. Suicide or suicidal tendencies has now become a worldwide human phenomenon, and our state, Nagaland, is also not immune to suicide cases as there are reported cases from time to time. Unfortunately, for so many years, these unfortunate incidents have been treated in a casual manner, with the society terming the person who committed suicide as a coward or someone possessed by the devil, and even go to the extent of discontinuing using his or her name in the family. However, fair to say that due to the improvement in education, the proper dissemination of information, and the proper understanding of the human side, especially with regard to depression, suicide cases or suicidal tendencies are being taken seriously. In suicidal cases among India, Nagaland is ranked the second lowest in the country. One reason that suicide is not so common from our state as compared to other societies is due to a strong buffer system, like we get support from our families or because of our strong religious beliefs. However, one distorted thinking among most of us Nagas is that we think only people with mental disorders are suicidal. However, suicidal behaviors indicate deep unhappiness but not necessarily mental disorders. Many people living with mental disorders are not affected by suicidal behavior, and not all people who take their own lives have a mental disorder. Suicide has existed since time immemorial, and about 5,000 to 1,500 dies by suicide every year around the world. The most common explanation a society can come up with for a suicide is depression. But little do we know that our culture and our society do affect suicides most of the time. Most of us has the thought that discussing about suicide is a bad idea and can be interpreted as a discouragement. However, in fact, openly talking about it can give an individual other option to rethink his or her decision and thereby preventing suicide. So instead of lending a deaf ear to this topic, we can try to be empathetic or at least be a good listener. So if you know anyone showing signs of suicide, be there for them. Listen with compassion and empathy without dismissing or judging, because your support can actually make a difference in their lives. And with that, I've come to the end of my speech. Thank you.
The psychology department had prescribed two activities for our students to conduct to perform in view of the World Suicide Prevention Day. These activities were activities which have been prescribed by the International Association for Suicide Prevention. The first activity which was prescribed was to take a minute to talk to your friends and family regarding suicide. And the second activity was to light a candle at night to show support for survivors of suicide, to show support for suicide prevention, and to remember a loved one who was lost due to suicide. So now we will have Si Moy Nekong, one of our students, who will be sharing her experience and insights of her conversation with her friends and family regarding suicide.
Good afternoon, Ned and teachers. My name is Moinigong from mm, my name is Moinigong from BA first semester psychology. Today I will be talking about the conversation I had with my friends and relatives regarding suicide. So I asked my parents about this, and they said that people from my community, from different clans, um, believe it as an heredity passed down to generation, or maybe it would a curse. And some elders from our community also believe that people commit suicide with the thought that people here on earth will miss them, mm, which is more to do with um, selfishness or foolishness. I could not collect much information regarding this because they were not much aware of it. And the conversation with my family shows that people from our community are much not much aware of not much aware. Okay, sorry. That many people from our community are not comfortable talking about suicide, which highlights the need to spread awareness and initiate dialogue of suicide. Yeah, that's all from my side. Thank you.
Okay, we are sorry for the interruption that happened. That will be addressed later. We also had our other students talk to their friends and family about suicide, and we had a discussion in class. And these are some reflections which our students have shared. I'll be reading it out. Last time I had a talk with a good friend of mine. We talked about suicide many a times. We talked about how during this pandemic, we talked about how during this pandemic we hear a lot of news, particularly of suicide. I just had a small talk with my sister about why people take such steps, and sometimes, because of some external pressure, it makes them feel unsafe and unwanted where they take such steps. When he goes through hard times and experience emotional breakdowns, suicidal thoughts often run across his mind, but he realizes that he has so much to live for and move on. But losing a life for one's lost hope in life is quite devastating. Majority of them are teenagers, and more importantly, they have not lived their life yet. Being forced in life, being harassed, unable to raise voices, under depression, they should be kept within reach and we should support them. The upcoming program, as one of our students very nicely put it, the upcoming program would be the type of medium through which we can educate more people on mental health and causes, sources of suicide. So, in our class discussion, we came to a consensus that yes, a healthy family environment, the community, the society, and a good support system play major roles in prevention of suicide. We concluded that even though society now is much more open to talk about suicide, many people are still very reluctant, especially if they have themselves had suicidal thoughts or have family or relatives who have committed suicide. And people are also very unaware still of their own role that they have in prevention of suicide, which is why we came to a consensus that yes, programs such as this, awareness programs, is very much still it's very much needed at all levels, be it school, college, and the community level. We also had, as we had mentioned earlier, we also had our students observe candlelight ceremony. So we have asked them to send in pictures of their ceremony that they had observed in their own homes. We have compiled it into a video. I hope you enjoy the video.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Inipenla, and today I will be speaking on some tips and suggestions in order to prevent suicide. So, as we all know, the cases of suicide has been rising to near crisis level, and it has been on the rise now more than ever. And it has become very important to prevent suicide in any way that we can, because suicide is very much preventable. So if you or anyone around you knows someone who has suicidal thoughts and ideations, then these are some tips and suggestions that I believe will help in preventing suicide. So first of all, what we can firstly do is listen, and listen without any judgment, because sometimes all a person wants is a good venting session where one can just express and tell about all their build up pressure and emotions. And being able to talk with a caring friend where you can just unburden all your troubles can go a very long way in relieving the things that are built up inside someone that could have led to a possible suicide attempt. And being a good listener, it does not require any special skills or talent. Like, all we have to do is be patient, be there for them, and listen with empathy. And it is so important for someone who is suicidal to feel heard. So show your compassion and tell them that they matter. And remember that the more you listen, the more you understand, and the less alone they'll feel. And, and it will also bring more hope for them in the future. Secondly, don't discount or minimize their feelings. Whatever reason that they might have for feeling suicidal might not make sense to you, but don't brush it off. Like, we never know how much struggles that they might be going through from within. And also, even if sometimes we think that those problems aren't serious enough, what is important is how they perceive their problems to be. And definitely, if those problems seem important and unbearable for them, then suicide might seem like a very valid option in their mind. So let's remember not to dismiss, ignore, or minimize the feelings of those who reach out for support, because it takes a lot of strength for someone who is suicidal to just go out there and reach out and seek for help. Thirdly, encourage them to seek professional help. Even though some suicides might come out of the blue, it is quite likely that the individual has been depressed for a very long time. And having suicidal thoughts and ideations is not typical, and it reflects a bigger underlying issue such as depression or substance problems, abuse, or internal conflicts or problem solving difficulties. So if someone shares with you that they are thinking about suicide, be supportive but also gently encourage them to seek therapy and professional help. And almost 30% of the people who attempt suicide tell someone beforehand. So if someone tells you that they have suicidal ideations and have displayed any risk of acting on their thoughts, then that is the moment of intervention. Because it is better to make an error on the side of responding too quickly than being too late. And fourthly, end the stigma surrounding mental health and suicide. Suicide results from a lot of factors, including mental illness. So, on top of the challenges that someone might be facing with their mental illness, they may also experience like self-shaming and guilt, along with negative stereotypes and prejudice caused by people's misconceptions of mental illness. And this could make it very challenging for those people to receive appropriate treatment. So here's a very gentle reminder that we can't be advocates of suicide prevention without also acknowledging the stigma that still exists and keeps people silently suffering. Let us be the one to break the stigma that is surrounding mental health and suicide, and let this begin from you and I. And finally, love them and show love to them. This is probably very simple and definitely goes without saying, but if your family or friend comes to you and tells you that they have suicidal intentions, then support them and be there for them. And try not to treat them differently. Avoid from keeping them alone, as isolation can put individuals at an increased risk for suicide. And honestly, our small actions, just as sitting next to them and telling them that they're not alone, giving a hug to them, and showing them that you are there for them without any expectations, could mean a lot to them. So be comfortable just being with them and love them no matter what. And to conclude, let's all keep in mind that our life is so much more precious and important than our present struggles, suffering, and circumstance. And we never know what kind of battles a person might be going through that they do not speak of. So let's try to be the person that makes somebody feel heard and seen. Everybody's growth looks different. So let's celebrate each other, support each other, love each other, and be a little more kind towards each other. And if you know any person who is suffering from suicidal thoughts, then go reach out to them and also suggest and encourage them to seek professional help from associations like the All Nagaland Counselors Association, or also urge them to reach out to private practitioners like church youth counselors and so on. Remember that our small actions could make a very big difference for someone. Thank you.
Thank you all to all the speakers for giving us such an insightful thoughts. As we're coming to an end of the session, I would like to share that there is no timeline for depression. It can happen with anyone, and also we need to realize that these thoughts kind of build up. But under no circumstances should you make yourself feel that you are not enough. Always remember that there are many people that loves you and want you. Never let this thought of taking away your life come in your mind ever. Society is an human issue. It does not concede with caste, sex, race, culture, or community. We should be brave and know that deciding to recover is an act of courage. It is not being coward. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope everyone stays safe. Have a good afternoon.